We continue now at the top of Daf Chafam Beis and Meseches Kiddushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 20b. On the previous summit, the Gemara said that when it comes to an Eved Ivri, we're always lenient. Let's say the Eved Ivri goes up in value, he still redeems himself for the lower value. If he goes down in value, then he gets to redeem himself for the lower value also. And the Gemara said, why should that be the case? Because Rav Yossi Rabbi Chanina teaches that the reason a person sells himself as an Eved Ivri is because of the Averos that he does. And the Gemara is continuing this discussion of Rav Yossi Rabbi Chanina that he's going to fall so far. It says Le'eker Mishpachas Ger, that's the offshoot. Zehanimkar la'avodas kol chava matzma. That means that he's even going to be sold to avodah zara itself. Rashi says Zehanimkar la'avodas kol chava matzma lachto veitzim ushar tzaracha v'lo l'shem elos, meaning he's going to have to chop wood, do other needs for the avodah zara. But the point over here is that the Eved Ivri happens to the individual. The person becomes an Eved Ivri because of the averis that he did and because of the teshuvah that he does not do. So maybe when it comes to the redemption, we should deal strictly with the Eved Ivri. Why are we being lenient in terms of the redemption of the Eved Ivri? And the Gemara says to that, Amar Lei said to him, Hasam over there, even when it comes to what Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina is discussing, but still Ha'ahadre Kra, the Pasuk returns him and says that we have to have Rachmanas, we have to have mercy on this Jewish person who was sold as a slave. Rashi says, Ha'ahadre Kra l'chol Yisrael l'rachim olav. The Pasuk returns him to all of Klal Yisrael and says, have mercy. The Tani Devei Rabbi Yishmael, because it was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, Hoel v'holach zev v'naseh komer la'avodas kol chavim. Since this individual, he went and now he's already serving the avodah zara. Emo lidchi even achar anofel. Maybe we should say to push the stone after the fallen, meaning maybe forget about him. As Rashi says, lidchi even achar anofel edcha even shalote lo geula. I push a stone over him and I say there is no redemption. Maybe you would think that Talmud lomar acharei nimkar geula tielo. It talks about the fact, again, he's sold, but he does get a redemption. Even this individual should be redeemed. But the Gemara continues, Ve'ima Geula Tielo, but maybe I can say that the pasuk of Geula Tielo, that he should be redeemed, Ki hechidelo litma bein ovdei kochavim, that's just so he shouldn't be assimilated among the idol worshippers. Hal inyan pidyon, but when it comes to the actual price of redemption, Nachmer alei mid Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, maybe again we should be strict, because as Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina said, all of this happened because the person didn't do teshuvah. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, but the Gemara says, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, Trei Kroi Ksivi, there are two psukim that are written. These were really the psukim that were mentioned on the previous Amud. Ksiv imod rabos bashanim, it says if there's many years left, it talks about redemption in that situation. Uksiv ma'at nishar bashanim, and it says, let's say there's a few years left of his service. But are there really cases where there are many years and cases where there are few years? In general, the service of an Eved Ivri is 6 years. Ella, rather, what does the pasuk mean when it talks about Rabos Bashanim and Ma'at Nishar Bashanim? It means Nisrabe Kaspo, that if his value goes up, Mikasef Miknaso, you calculate according to the value of his purchase, the lower amount. And Nismaid Kaspo, if his value goes down, Kafi Shanav, then you calculate according to the amount of years left, meaning again, you go by the lower amount. That's what the pasuk means. But the Gemara continues, V'yema hachi kamer achmona, but maybe I can say this is what the pasuk means. Heicha do'avet treu pashle dalid nesivle dalid mikasef miknas. So it simply means if the person worked 2 years and there are 4 years remaining, that's the idea that there are a lot of years remaining, so then you have to give 4 according to the purchase price. And the other way around, ava dalid, maybe let's say he worked 4 years, upashule tarti, and there's only 2 years left, nesiv tarti kifi shanav, then you pay the 2 years according to the amount of years that are left. That's what it means, that there's many years or few years. It just depends how much of the 6 years has he worked. But the Gemara says, no, Imkain, if that was the case, Nichtov Kroy Emod Rabos Shonim, Imiat Nishar Shonim. It doesn't have to have the base. It can just say Emod Rabos Shonim, Imiat Nishar Shonim. Mai Bashonim, what does it mean? Bashonim, Nisrabe Kaspo, Bashonim, Mikasef Miknaso. It means to say again, let's say his value went up. That's when we say Mikasef Miknaso, you go by the original price, the lower price. Nismaid Kaspo, Bashonim, Kafi Shonav. And if his value went down, then you go by the lower price again. What is remaining? And the Gemara concludes on this. Summer of Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Darshinu Rav Nachman Lahani Kroi Kasinai. Rav Nachman darshan these psukim like Sinai, meaning to say, this is an excellent drush, an excellent interpretation of these psukim. And the Gemara continues, Boy Minei Rav Huna Bar Chinana me Rav Sheshas. Rav Huna Bar Chinana asked from Rav Sheshas the following question: Eved Ivri hanimkar lo'ovid kochavim. If you have an Eved Ivri that's sold to an idol worshipper, to a non-Jew, nigal lechatzoin oeno nigal lechatzoin. Is he redeemed halfway, or is he not redeemed halfway? Meaning to say, you'll pay half his value, and then he'll only have to serve half the time. Gulaso meistei achuza gamar. Do we say that we learn a gzeira shav? It says gulaso by an eved ivri, and it says gulaso by stei achuza by the ancestral field, and we'll say mas stei achuza eino nigal lechatzayin, just like a stei achuza cannot be redeemed halfway. Af hainami eino nigal lechatzayin, so too over here by eved ivri, he can't be redeemed halfway. Odilma, or maybe lakula amrinon, if the redemption halfway leads to a leniency, which we'll discuss in a moment, so then we would say that the redemption works, but lechumra lo amrinon, but we wouldn't say it if it leads to a chumrah. Amar le, so he said to him, Rav Sheshes responded, Lavamrid hasam nimkar kulo v'lo chetzio. Didn't we say over there that when we're selling an eved ivri, let's say an eved ivri steals and he can't pay, so it has to be a situation where he's sold entirely to pay for the theft, but not half of him is sold to pay for the theft. It has to be the same amount. We said that in terms of selling the eved ivri. So hachanami, so we'll apply the same logic over here as well. Nigal kulo v'lo chetzio. You have to totally redeem him. It cannot be halfway. Amar Abaya says, if you do say there's a concept of redeeming the Eved Ivri halfway, we can find that it leads to leniency, and we can find also that it leads to astringency. Lakula, you can find the leniency as follows. Zavne b'meil, let's say the Eved is purchased for 100. Yoav lechamshin, so then he gives him 50 in terms of redemption. Pal godidmei, meaning he gives him half of the value, so he's redeemed him halfway. V'ashbach v'kam al mosan, but then he increases in value, and now he's not worth 100, he's worth 200. So the question is, if you're going to say that the 50 represents half the redemption, so he's only going to need to do the other half. If you say that it's possible to redeem halfway, so he just needs to give another 100, and then he'll be able to go free, because again, the 50 represents 50%. But if you say it's not possible to redeem him halfway, then he's got to complete the 200, he has to give another 150 in order for him to go free. But the Gemara says that whole thing is not true. But didn't you say before, Nisrabe kaspo mikesef miknaso, that you said that in the situation where he goes up in value, but we're always lenient anyway, you always pay the lower amount, you go by the kesef miknaso, you go by the purchase price in that case, it always is in the favor of the redemption of the Eved. So therefore, why would you ever need to worry about the value of 200? And the Gemara says to that, could go into oker v'zol v'oker. The case over here is that actually originally he was worth more, then he went down in the interim, and then he was worth more again. So ultimately it does need to be 200 at the end, but in that middle stage over there, he was redeemed halfway, and so that's the question over here. If in that middle stage he was redeemed halfway and that took effect, so then 50% would be taken care of, that would be the leniency. And the Gemara continues, Mashkachas lo l'chumra, you can also find that it could be a stringency. Zavne b'mosan, let's say you have a situation where he was purchased for 200, Yohiv meya palgedid mei, and he paid 100, he gave 100 for redemption, that was half the value. V'yichsev v'kam al meya, but then what happened was, he went down in value, now he's only worth 100. Now if you say that the redemption halfway worked, so now he's 50% redeemed, so then you have to give another 50, and then he'll go free. That's the stringency over here, even though 100 was given, and that's all he's worth right now, but at the time the 100 was given, that represented 50%. If you say that he's not redeemed halfway, so that 100 becomes like a deposit that he put down, and that's given, and then that becomes the redemption. He can go free, because again, at the value now of redemption is only going to be 100. And the Gemara continues, Boy minei Rav Huna bar Chinana me Rav Sheshes. Rav Huna bar Chinana asks from Rav Sheshes the following question: Hamocher bayis bebotei orichom. If somebody sells a house in a walled city, the halacha over there is that the seller has 1 year to redeem it. Nigal lechatzoin o eno nigal lechatzoin. Can it be redeemed halfway, or can it not be redeemed halfway? Gulaso mistei achuza gamar. We can say that we learn gzeira shava gulaso from stei achuza. Again, it says gulaso by both botei orichom and by stei achuza, and we'll say mas stei achuza eno nigelas lechatzoin. Just like by stei achuza, it cannot be redeemed halfway. It says he has to have the entire value to redeem. Af hainami eno nigal lechatzoin. So too over here, he's not able to redeem it halfway. Odilmor maybe heicha de gali heicha de lo gali, where such a halach is revealed by stei achuza. That's the halach. It can't be halfway. But if it doesn't say that, let's say over here by the bayis b'batei orichom, it doesn't say that, so then maybe it can be done halfway. Amar Lei said to him, Midrasha shel Rabbi Shimon Nishma, from the Medrash of Rabbi Shimon we understand, Shalova v'goel, that number one, we can be lenient, he can borrow money in order to redeem, he doesn't have to actually have the money, he can borrow it, v'goel lechatzayin, and it's also okay to redeem it halfway. The Tanya, as we learned in a Braisim, Gol Yigal, the pasuk uses a double language, Gol Yigal, Malamit Shalava V'Goel Lechatzayin. It teaches us that he can borrow and redeem, and he can redeem it halfway. Amar Reb Shimon says, Matam, what's the reason for this? Because we find when a person sells his ancestral field, he has a certain strength. Because if Yovel comes and he never redeemed it back, it actually returns to the original owner. By Yovel, the seller has that advantage when it comes to the Steachuza. And so therefore, since he has that advantage, he also has a disadvantage. She'eno lova v'goel, he's not allowed to borrow to redeem, v'goel lechatzoyin, and also he's not allowed to redeem halfway. Similarly, the other way around, Makdish, let's say somebody's Makdish's field. Shehora Kocho, there he has a disadvantage. Shem Higia Yovel V'lo Nigala, the halach is if Yovel comes and he didn't redeem it, Yotza LeKohanim B'Yovel, it actually goes to the Kohanim at Yovel. So Yipa Kocho, so he also has an advantage that counterbalances Shalova V'Goel Lechatzoyin, that he's able to borrow and redeem, and he can redeem halfway. And therefore, the same thing applies over here. When it comes to one who sells a house in the walled cities as well, since he has a disadvantage, that if a year goes by and he doesn't redeem it within the year, then it goes fully over to the buyer. So therefore, because of that, to counterbalance, he has an advantage, that he can borrow and redeem, and he's also allowed to redeem halfway. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei, we have the following question. The Brisa says, Im Gol Yigal, if he surely redeems, Melamid Shalova V'Goel Lechatzoyin. This is talking about by somebody who's Makdash a field. It teaches us that he's able to borrow and redeem, and he can redeem halfway. Sheyachol, because you might have said as follows, V'alo Dinu, it should be logical the other way around. Uma Mocher Ste'achuza Sheyipa Kocho, if by a person who sells his ancestral field, he has an advantage. Shem Higia Yovel V'lo Nigala, that if Yovel comes and it's not redeemed, Chozeres Lebaleh, it goes back to the original owners, B'Yovel and Yovel. Hora Kocho, and he has a disadvantage, She'ein Lava V'Goel Lechatzoyin, that he's not allowed to borrow and redeem, and he's not allowed to redeem it halfway. So Makdish, so you could have said that somebody who's Makdish, Shehora Kocho, who has a disadvantage, Shemigia Yovel V'lo Nigala Yotza LeKohanim B'Yovel, that if Yovel arrives and it's not redeemed, it goes to the Kohanim and Yovel, Eino Din Shehora Kocho, so you could have argued that he should have the disadvantage, She'ein Lova V'Goel Lechatzoyin, that he's not allowed to borrow and redeem, and he cannot redeem halfway. You could have argued that, and that's why the pasuk says Gol Yigal, the double language, to say that he is allowed to borrow and redeem, and he's allowed to redeem halfway. But the Gemara says you couldn't have had that, you couldn't have made that kal v'chomer, because ma'ala mocher ste'achuza, because you could respond that what do we find by somebody who sells his ancestral field? Shekain hora kocho, there is a disadvantage there. Shekain hora kocho ligoel miyad, the disadvantage is it can't be redeemed right away. The halacha by a ste'achuza is that the redemption you have to wait 2 years. Tomer b'makdish sheyipa kocho ligoel miyad, whereas when it comes to makdish, there he has an advantage that he's able to redeem it immediately, so therefore you would never have learned that out from the ste'achuza. But the Gemara says back, no, mocher bayis b'batei orechomi yochiach. You could have taken an example from one who sells his house in the walled cities that would have proven the other way. Sheyipa kocho ligoel miyad, because over there he does have the advantage of being able to redeem immediately. Ve'ein lova v'goel lechatzoyin, and he's not allowed to borrow and redeem, and he's not allowed to redeem halfway. And here you see the exact opposite of what we said above from Rabbi Shimon. We said above again that he's able to borrow and redeem, and he's able to redeem halfway by a house in a walled city. And here he's saying that's not allowed. And the Gemara answers, Lo kash, it's not difficult. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph.